in meditation and also perhaps in life, there's this sort of balance between being a little bit too relaxed, a little bit too lazy, and trying a bit too hard, right? And so a lot of people are like, oh, I want to do this, I want to start this business, or I want to write this book, or I want to do this podcast, and then you like put a little bit of effort into it, but you're not really going the full 9 yards. And then you just like, oh, I'm not successful, or I'm not happy, and things aren't going well. It's like, well, maybe you need to put a little bit more effort in. And then there's people like myself who put like too much effort in, and I'm like, okay, this isn't working, but it's because I'm not trying hard enough, and I just have to try harder. And then you end up breaking something.
Welcome back to another episode of the Inside Japan podcast, which is sponsored by JobsinJapan.com, the best place on the internet to find your next job in Japan. I'm Charlie, and on this episode, I speak with my friend Misha, who left Japan, but came back after starting his business, which is an online coaching platform to help people get into the big tech companies. We dig into burnout and hustle culture, the benefits of meditation and watching self-improvement videos on YouTube, and how hard it is to get a job in a big tech company in Japan. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Misha, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, man, good to be here again. I think this is the second time.
Yeah, you were on, I think you were on the Live, Work, Play Japan podcast when I was doing that back in the day.
Yeah.
So you've done so much stuff since then. Like you left Japan and now you're back in Japan. I think a lot of people, they'll leave and they'll never come back, but you came back to Japan. So what's that about?
For sure, yeah. So I think we spoke before I left, and I was in Japan for just some context. So I was in Japan for 5 years working in recruitment, and then quit that job, did some traveling, based in Tokyo, traveled around Southeast Asia, and then sort of had this opportunity with my wife and I. Were like, hey, why don't we go somewhere else for a while, right? We don't have kids, we don't have any really big obligations. She wanted to freelance, I wanted to start my own business. So it's like, well, now or never. So we sort of did a bit of research into Europe, because that was just in general a destination for us, and we found the Netherlands to be a pretty easy place to move to. Mostly because of the visa. The visa process is really straightforward for US citizens and also for Japanese citizens. So I got like a 2-year visa, like self-employed freelance visa, costs like $5,000 between the two of us. And as long as you have like a really simple business plan, then you can move there. So that's what we did. We just moved there for 2 years, and it was probably the worst possible timing, right at the start of the pandemic. So it was very isolated and secluded, and kind of went through a lot of emotional turmoil during that period, but at the same time also started my business, which is a coaching platform. And I did that for 2 years, and then the visa expired, had an opportunity to extend it, but we're like, yeah, we miss Tokyo, we miss our friends, we miss the big city. Why don't we go back, eat some sushi, and have a good time? So we got back a year ago.
I wonder if a big part of that is because you went there during the pandemic and you didn't really get to make all those connections and
For sure.
actually be around people all that much, that you're like, oh yeah, I actually really miss my friends in Tokyo. Even though if you'd been in Tokyo, maybe you probably would have missed your friends too, because there was a lot of lockdown and people not being able to go places as much.
Yeah.
So
possible. Yeah. Like I definitely think there's many factors. I think pandemic was a big part of it. We got there about 6 months before the pandemic, so I did make a few friends, and we got to travel a bit and see the country and a bit of Europe, and so there was some of that happened. But I think apart from the pandemic, it was you basically, wherever you go, you're the constant in the equation, right? So ultimately, a lot of the problems that surfaced in those 2 years and afterwards, in terms of like burnout and like working too hard, didn't have that much to do with the pandemic, and more to do with myself. And like, hey, I don't know how to manage my time. I don't know how to set boundaries. I don't know how to communicate my emotions. And all these things came out during that time, probably a bit stronger than they normally would have given the circumstances, but they still came out. So I think, maybe I still would have got burnt out. I still would have had a tough time, even if we didn't have a pandemic. I don't really know, but I think the startup that I did and the way I decided to do things was a big reason for some of the problems that resulted from that, which I've sort of more or less worked through since then, fortunately. So
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing that I want to talk about because before we talk about the business that you started, I
sure.
also really struggled when I went freelance and started doing things by myself.
Mm-hmm.
It was really tough. But you've talked about with me before about meditation,
Mm-hmm.
about organizing your time. Like I was reading your blog for a long time. Like I really enjoyed I think you just started up again, right? Like
Yeah,
recently.
yeah.
And yeah, you had a newsletter that you were sending out
Mm-hmm.
that I found really helpful and really inspiring about like basically a lot to do with like mindset, ways of thinking,
Yeah.
like cognitive biases and things that we do that kind of like make us less effective.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it really useful. And we talked a little bit recently about you did a meditation retreat, and I wondered about
Mm-hmm.
that as well. Like, can you tell me a little bit about why you think meditation is a really important skill and a really useful technique?
Yeah, for sure. So I think I was doing that newsletter that you mentioned for a while as sort of a way to share what's going on with others, and also I just love writing, so I think that was the reason I was doing it. And I sort of stopped that, but I'm back at it again, and it's just something I legitimately enjoy, which I can't necessarily say for what I was doing in business. There was a lot of things I was doing which I didn't enjoy, but I told myself like, hey, I have to do this because this is what entrepreneurs do, or I have to be in a role that maybe isn't great, and I'll just sort of grind it out.
It's like
And
that
yeah,
hustle culture is kind of toxic, right?
yeah, it's very like, and it's okay to hustle, like, and I do like to hustle for certain things, and I think a certain amount of effort, uh determination is really important. And there's actually a term in, so this meditation, kind of going into that a little bit, in the meditation tradition that I'm currently following, uh this guy Goenka is a teacher who died a few years ago, but he started this sort of nonprofit meditation center that's all around the world now. And there's a concept in uh, in the meditation technique called aditan, and aditan just means like strong determination. So like in this retreat that I did, for example, you would have to like sit for an hour without moving, without blinking, without doing anything, and just like being perfectly still. And you would do this like 3 times a day. So this concept of strong determination was really appealing to me because I'm like, yeah, like work really hard. Like this is what it's all about. And what you actually find is that in meditation, and also perhaps in life, there's this sort of balance between being a little bit too relaxed, a little bit too lazy, and trying a bit too hard, right?
Mm.
And so a lot of people are like, oh, I want to do this, I want to start this business, or I want to write this book, or I want to do this podcast, and then you like put a little bit of effort into it, but you're not really going the full 9 yards. And then you just like, oh, I'm not successful, or I'm not happy, and things aren't going well. It's like, well, maybe you need to put a little bit more effort in. And then
Mm.
there's people like myself who put like too much effort in, and I'm like, okay, this isn't working, but it's because I'm not trying hard enough, and I just have to try harder. And then you end up breaking something inside of
Mm.
you, whether it's physically or emotionally or spiritually, right? And so I think I realize that about myself, whether it's in meditation and maybe trying too hard in meditation, or whether it's in business. There is sort of this balance where you have to just check yourself, you know, chickadee check
Mm.
yourself before you wreck yourself, sort of thing, right? Like, okay, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? How do I feel? I've been doing this for 6 months and nothing's happening. Maybe I don't know what I'm doing, or maybe I should get some help, or maybe I should do something different. Um, so I've sort of blended in a little bit of the conversation there, but that was more talking about my experience with the startup, and like how I should have done things quite differently and listened to myself, and that probably would have prevented some of the burnout that I experienced later on. Um, yeah, so that's a little bit about that. We can talk about
Yeah.
meditation too, but I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, because I know you're really into self-mastery and like self-improvement and all of that stuff. Like, which thinkers did you listen to when you were struggling with that kind of burnout stuff? Because I listened to a bunch of people like, we're both into like Tim Ferriss and like Gary V and all of that stuff.
Sure.
But I got really like you, I think I got really burned out on that like hustle culture. And I just feel like
Yeah,
I would wake up mornings and just be like, I don't want to work. I don't want to do anything. I just want to quit everything. And it
for
took me a long
sure.
time to get through. And like, I got there through, kind of more like Taoist philosophy, like stop
Mm-hmm.
struggling. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you don't need to struggle. The
Mm.
struggle, like, of course you need to work, but it's not about, it's not, I don't know, it's very hard to explain because it was, it was kind of something that came really gradually just by experiencing this,
Hmm.
like rather than um fighting constantly, rather than always being like, I need to work harder, I need to do more. Just like just let things happen. Like it's not the end of the world if it doesn't all go your way all the
Yeah,
time. And like, fall back in love with the joy of like doing the work that you were doing this
hmm,
for in the first place. I didn't
absolutely.
quit like teaching English so that I could like stress myself out all day every day about this
Mm.
work that I was doing. So yeah, who were some of
Yeah,
the thinkers that really helped you, and or maybe some of the philosophies that really
sure.
helped you get up past that?
A lot of it was the self-discovery around emotions and like emotional expression. So I think a lot of the times, like what you're describing right there, is a level of self-awareness of knowing that you're struggling or knowing that you're trying too hard. And so there's sort of the emotional work that we all need to do. And it's a very lengthy process that I'm still going through. And I think everyone goes through in their lives, which may require some therapy or some coaching or whatever. But I think for me, I was like, okay, well, why am I feeling these emotions? Like, what are those emotions that I'm feeling? Why am I not able to express these emotions? Is it something in my childhood or something traumatic that happened or something I was just sort of conditioned this way that I can't sort of um, tell someone that, oh, my day was really sucky and like this week was actually really sucky. Maybe if I said that, then there would be some yellow red flags and I could have prevented some of those issues. So I think on that train of thought, there was a lot of uh, thinkers and writers that I followed. So Brene Brown is one author, and she writes a lot about emotions. She's an emotions researcher. She wrote a book called Atlas of the Heart, and a few others. She's actually got a documentary on HBO talking about labeling our emotions and what those are and how to sort of relate to those. So she was a really big help. Um, and then there was a little bit deeper on the like inner child and childhood sort of side of things. There was things like some psychologists and authors like Dr. Gabor Mate. Um, yeah, and I think you've probably heard of him, and he's got a few books on yeah, like trauma and healing and all that.
Yeah,
So
I remember watching some of his lectures, and he's very much of a sort of like almost a Jungian
hmm,
psychoanalytic
hmm,
like psychologist, and but I think he's very much updated it for a more modern
yeah,
approach, which is really really about kind of connecting with yourself and accepting yourself, which I think
yeah,
is it's a difficult thing because we have so much now in our generation. There's so
mm,
many messages coming at us all the time. I don't think any generation before us has had this kind of almost constant messaging at us all the time. And
yeah.
so yeah, I found his stuff really helpful as well.
Yeah, yeah. There was one book I think he wrote recently, or I don't know, maybe in the last few years, which was really interesting, and it wasn't like directly related to everything I was going through, but it's sort of when you read about something and sometimes it clicks and it sort of maybe sets off some alarm bells, and you're like, I don't want that to happen to me. So like you sort of you get a bit cautious. So I think in his book he was talking about so he was like working in some hospices and he was talking about cancer patients. And many studies actually have shown this, but he was talking about why do people get cancer, right? And there's many reasons, of course, right? There's genetic, there's environmental reasons, there's all sorts of reasons and built up stress, and all these things maybe contribute to it, but they don't have one thing out of all those that I just mentioned that is common to all cancer patients. There is, however, something that they do have in common based on these big studies, and that is something counterintuitive, and it's the tendency for people to repress their anger.
Mm.
So, out of all these tens of thousands of cancer patients, and they've done these, obviously they're observational and they're like questionnaires and stuff, but they will ask them about their childhood, they'll ask them about their expression of emotions, and a very large percentage of them have trouble or have had trouble expressing their anger, very specifically that emotion. And that's interesting. So there's a field, I think it's called like psychoneuroimmunology or something along those terms. And is this basically field that connects our emotions and how we process our day to day and how that influences our immune system. And obviously, that can relate to maybe influencing how you get some certain diseases or illnesses. So obviously, it's a big jump to say like if you don't express your anger, you're going to get cancer. That's not what he's saying. He's saying it's like one of the factors that could contribute to it. But that's just really interesting that that could even be a factor. And when I read that, I was like, well, shit. I gotta express my emotions, or sorry, well, crap. I'm not supposed to swear on this podcast, but you know what I'm saying. So
Yeah. Honestly, yeah, I think that approach, and thinking about the body as a holistic system rather than, it's not, and I think maybe this is just where we're at in medicine and where we're at in connection. I know we're getting off topic in terms of like
not
Japan
at
and
all.
work and stuff,
Yeah,
but this is super interesting. Like, I think we used to think of things as just like, someone's got a dysregulation in their serotonin, that's why they have depression, and then they just give them something that makes that serotonin back to a normal level, and
mm-hmm.
they think that fixes the depression, but that's not how it is. It's such an interconnected system that
Yeah,
it connects not only with how we think and how we feel. It's not just a chemical system. I think there's a lot of research now that's suggesting that that approach has
yeah.
been the core for the last 50, 60
It's
years
it's
is
incorrect.
completely
Yeah,
flawed from the
yeah,
ground up, and
yeah,
that's what's causing a lot of it's exacerbating issues because people think, I'm getting treatment for these things, and it's just like drugs that
yeah.
actually end up just making the problem extend out longer than it would
Mm-hmm.
have if you just dealt with it. And like, this is something that I think we talked about before. There's like, sometimes when people are stressed out and they're depressed, it's because there's something really crappy going on in their life that's making them unhappy. And if they tried to deal with it, they wouldn't feel unhappy anymore, rather than just being
Yeah,
like, oh, this is a chemical dysregulation, let's just give you some drugs and you can carry on, without having to deal with that
yeah,
past trauma or with
for sure.
the stress.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a more holistic approach. So, so I think, yeah, going back to your question, I guess those are some of the authors that influenced me on the emotional side. Perhaps on the meditation, sort of Buddhism, psychology side, there's there is one book I read. I have to remember the author, but it was called The Paradox of Intention. And this is very much what you're talking about, not putting in too much effort and just letting things be. And there's all sorts of like interesting examples from this book. I think there was one example where Freud, talking about like Freud had a patient that had a speech impediment or like a stuttering problem, and they so he was like talking to him and like trying to solve the speech issue. And then around that same time, at that patient's school, there was a play where one of the characters happened to have a speech impediment. So they're like, hey, like, you're the perfect person for this role because you have this. So he prepared for this, and then on the day of the play, he completely lost his speech impediment. Like he couldn't do it because he was trying to have a speech impediment, and it completely negated it. And so it's this really interesting phenomenon, right? Where you try too hard and you can't do that thing.
Hmm.
And there's so many examples of this in life. And I think it brings me to this idea of like doing a startup or a business. And a lot of the CEOs I know, a lot of the founders I know, like they're actually super lazy. I think the ones that are successful, like they're actually really lazy. And I say that like in a nice way. And like, yes, they've worked really hard and yeah, they got a business, but their job is really, it's like up here in their minds, right? And like they are successful because they're able to step back and able to take time off and able to just like let other people do things for them. And at the end
Hmm.
of the day, it's like a good day is like you wake up, you spend time with your family, you make a few decisions and you go home, right? You're not like burning the midnight oil. And so it's this interesting idea. Like, yeah, like if you know the right actions to take and put in the right amount of effort, then you're not going to get exhausted. You're not going to get burnt out. You're not going to try too hard. And then you're still motivated the next day. And so this all sort of comes back to, yeah, this book I was reading and all these things in combination sort of influenced me to take a slightly different perspective.
Yeah, so how did that help you when you were starting Carrus? Because I remember when you were starting it, I think I just finished my coaching course,
Mm-hmm.
and so we talked about it a lot because I was, possibly someone in the sort of wheelhouse of part of your
Mm-hmm.
potential target customer.
Mm-hmm.
But you changed it very quickly. Like I think it went through a few iterations of like,
Mm,
let's focus on this, let's focus on this, and then you
yeah.
you found out where you're at, and now you've done seed funding, you've got
Mm-hmm.
employees, you're building the company and growing the company. So how did that start off, and what did you do when you sort of figured out like, oh, we need to do something a little bit different?
Yeah. So in retrospect, it took way too long. I know you said like we were changing things really quickly, but it didn't feel like very, very fast. It felt very painful and slow and just I think looking back, like, okay, it took 3 years to do this. It's like should have taken like a year, to be honest. Like, if we would just sort of, yeah, listen to investors and mentors, which I honestly I ignored often. I was like, nah, it's fine, I'll figure it out. But you should listen to people sometimes, and you should try and take people's advice, um, and put your ego aside. But basically, yeah, the very short version here is that I started this business with this general idea of like I want to build a coaching platform because I was coaching myself as like a freelance coach, helping people with like job interviews and stuff. And so I was like, there's a lot of people doing this. So like let me just make a platform marketplace and like connect coaches like myself to people looking for jobs and that want that sort of help. And so that's where I started, but I had like no experience coding or developing or really hiring people for like a tech product. So it was very, very scrappy. And I was like hiring freelancers on Upwork and like spending a bunch of money, hired the wrong people. They like tried to like piece something together. It didn't work. So like I probably spent like 4 months just like wasting my time and money. And then eventually I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. So I looked up some CTOs in Tokyo. I just like went on LinkedIn. I was like typed in CTO Tokyo, found a couple of people and reached out to them. And I was like, hey, like I'm a first time founder. I don't know what I'm doing. I spent this money on my product. Can you help me figure out how to build this, just like as an advisor? And so that's what I did.
Is
And
that is
yeah,
that how you actually end up finding a co-founder or like
yeah,
someone to work with you? Because
yeah,
I think a lot of people are worried to reach out to people on LinkedIn. They're like, oh, they're just going to be like, who's this guy? Like, I get a
yeah.
lot of people reaching out to me on LinkedIn, but every now and then it's someone who has actually read what I've done, who's actually taken a look at like the work that I've put out there and said, oh, I read this thing years ago, and I'm interested to talk with you about this. And actually, and like often I'll give those people, I'll talk to them on Zoom and have like a quick 30-minute
Mm.
chat with them about what they're doing, and a lot of them find it very helpful just because I'm like, oh, that's actually pretty cool that they reached out to someone they actually like did some research on rather than just like trying to get something from me.
Yeah, absolutely right. And if you personalize it and put in some effort, then that person is going to get back to you. And I mean, in my case, it was pretty transactional and straightforward. I was like, I will pay you money if you give me advice. So, I had a couple people get back to me, and yeah, one of the guys I met, Hugo, he ended up being a co-founder later on because I asked him to, and we got along and really enjoyed working together. And he helped me hire a developer who also ended up being a co-founder. So yeah, that's sort of how it worked out. So we had this team of three of us starting to build together, and yeah, went off, raised a little bit of money, probably a little bit prematurely, but we did that anyways, and hired a few more people, mostly developers and a designer, and I think it started out as a very general idea. And so we had all sorts of coaches from different backgrounds and different categories like business coaching, entrepreneurship coaching, life coaching, blah, blah, blah. And that's really not the way, like, that's the opposite advice to start a business, right? It's like you start really niche and you expand from there, generally speaking, right? So one thing we realized, we experimented with some different models and like tried a bunch of stuff, but one thing we realized is like a lot of people are gravitating towards career coaching. A lot of people are gravitating towards profiles that had specific names of companies like Amazon, Facebook, Google. Like, I worked at these companies, I can help you. So okay, let's just focus on that. And that's what we ended up doing. But 18 months or 2 years ago, we made this big pivot to just focus on careers and getting a job in a big tech company. And that's what we're doing now. So like all of our coaches have ended up being sort of coaches or mentors from big tech companies, and the audience are people who want jobs in these big tech companies. So it's, again, pretty niche, but then expanding from there, it's like now you can provide different types of coaching and kind of expand to different companies and so on and so forth. So that's sort of the very short version of what happened.
Yeah, that's good, because when you start out, if you've got too many services, people don't really know what you
Yeah.
represent. Whereas if you've got this one sort of core product, then expanding later, once you actually have that brand recognition, you have people actually paying you, so you have enough money to invest in like making your product
Yeah,
reach more people or be useful to more people. I think that's really
totally.
cool. And it's interesting because I've had friends who have tried for like the Amazon interviews for Apple or for Google in Japan,
Hmm.
and it's a complicated interview process that takes
Yeah.
there's whole steps to it, and there's actually like books that have been written about how to pass the Amazon interview, even though obviously it's like changing all the time. They
Yeah.
have all of these different things. Like a friend of mine told me they have this thing called, they call the bar raiser,
Yeah.
which is somebody who from a different department who comes in and
Yeah.
whose whole job it is to act horribly towards you and treat you really badly and make you feel like really nervous so they can.
Totally what it might feel like, but actually they're usually the nicest interviewers. So I
Oh,
actually,
really?
yeah, so they're the thing that people get intimidated by, and why your friend might have said that, is because they ask really good questions.
Mm,
So they ask very probing questions. And the reason they do that is because they want to get to the answer, right?
mm.
Not because they're trying to like um, you know, call you out on something, or they're not
I thought
trying
the
to
whole
trip
point
you
was they're
up.
trying to rattle you so that they can see what you're like under pressure.
No, I think that's what it might feel like, but I think all the people that I've helped with Amazon, and actually I interviewed a bar raiser for my podcast. So this is, I asked her this question directly. I was like, hey,
Mm.
my impression is bar raisers are really like kind of mean and tough, and they're just like trying to stress you out. And she's like, no, no, no. Most experiences people have are really positive, and they come out feeling like it was a great interview.
Oh,
And
wow.
and the reason is they want to make you feel comfortable so they can get the truth. Like they want to make you feel like, okay, you can tell me everything, and I really want to know the details of this. So if they're just making you feel super pressured, you're probably not going to come out with all the details in a very clear-headed way. So of course, some people do have that experience where maybe, yeah, everyone's different, right? And maybe they don't respond as well to probing questions, or maybe they don't have the answer to probing question to the question, so therefore they're stressed, right? There's
Mhm.
different reasons someone might perceive the interview to be a little bit hostile, but in general, like they're some of the nicest interviewers, and they also have the most interview experience. Like
Mm.
you have to have like minimum whatever 1,000 hours of interviewing plus training just to be a bar raiser. And it's not, yeah, it's a very small percentage of the corporate population at Amazon is actually a bar raiser.
Wow, that's really huge actually, because like I think there's things like saying that to learn a foreign language, like to learn Japanese as an English speaker, it takes like 2,000 hours or something like that.
Yeah,
And
I don't
and
know if it's
so
1,000. I don't quote me on that. Like
yeah,
it's a big number. Yeah.
but it's like, yeah, they actually
Yeah.
do really train them for this thing. So that's
Yeah.
why I guess it's really good if you are trying to get a job at Amazon or a big company like that, that you should have someone try and explain to you, like, this isn't just like your average
Yeah.
interview. Like I used to have this attitude of just go into the interview, be authentic and genuine, and I'll come out okay. And for some like English teaching jobs, I think that works just fine, because most of
Sure.
them are just looking for a,
A
preferably
body.
yeah, a native level speaker who looks the part and who comes across as
Sure.
professional, and that's good enough, most of them. But if you're actually doing something where a high level of competency is required on a day-to-day basis, then yeah, I think they really do want to push
Sure.
to you.
Yeah, there's a process for sure. I mean, all these big tech companies have a process and they have values and they have certain questions they ask. So I think that's the beauty of having someone that's worked at those companies that can help you out. So that's basically what we're doing at my company, Carrus.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
So why do you run Carrus from Japan? Is it like you just because you want to be here? Did you start it like what you said you started while you were in the Netherlands, or
yeah,
you know, but you've based it in the US, like the company itself is based in the US.
yeah,
So do you have like a fully remote team? Is this like something
yeah.
that's difficult to sort of operate from inside Japan?
No, not really. So we can actually, I think maybe we can get into the dirty secrets of people that have companies in Japan
Yeah.
conversation in a bit here. But so my story is really straightforward. So like I set up the business in the Netherlands at first in order to get the visa. So I got the visa, set up the have the business, and I could have set up the business in the US from the beginning. It actually would have been a lot easier. But because we wanted to be in Europe, that's what I did. And then after we left Europe, I actually shut down the European business and then transferred everything to a US C corp in Delaware, which is pretty standard for startups
Yeah.
for various like tax reasons and like selling your business and all these things. And that was very deliberate because it was easy, and also I'm American and we were thinking of like raising more money, so it's just sort of an ideal place. And then moving back to Japan, uh, I don't need to worry about a visa because my wife is Japanese.
Mm, okay, that makes things a lot easier because there's I've
Yeah,
done podcasts on this before, like trying to get a business investor visa or an
yeah,
entrepreneur visa is just an absolute nightmare headache. Like they have some things in Fukuoka now, they're trying to make it easier, but it's still very difficult.
yeah, yeah. You definitely need the money there, and I think I have friends that have sort of both stories where like they have a spouse or they have a bunch of money and they're able to just like invest the 50K and like hire people and like get the visa. So like those stories are there, but it's like where are you getting that money? Why do you have that money in the first place? So there's a bit of an advantage you have if you already have cash. But I do have friends who have literally they have started businesses. And they were just like starting to make a lot of money, and they just did it from scratch, and they hit on a good market, and they were able to get that visa. I don't think that happens as often, but yeah, you do have both cases, I think.
Yeah, and I do think that it's very difficult for people. So in my case, I wanted to start a coffee business here,
Mm,
and it's very difficult to do that kind of thing in Japan. Like it's a lot more difficult here than it would be like almost anywhere
mm,
else. And
hmm
I often advise people who come. I've got a lot of people who follow me from my Live Work Play Japan stuff, which was more about sort of freelancing, entrepreneurship, and making more money.
Yeah,
And a lot of them have asked me questions about this, and I'm just like, unless you have a really compelling reason to be in Japan, or if you're married to a Japanese person, and you can stay here as long as you want for any reason,
hmm
like you have to have a good compelling reason to be in Japan to start your business here, because it can be a difficult market in terms of I say it's kind of like almost like there's a middle point, a
hmm
balance where it's like Japan is incredibly underutilized because of all the difficulty in starting a business. There's a lot of opportunities here for people who can see like, oh,
hmm
this product could be like 1,000 times better, and there's no one competing in this market because they're all like
yeah,
these old ossified Japanese companies that can't update for the modern sort of like UI UX
yeah,
on digital generation. But then there's also like the reason why there are all these old ossified companies doing that is because it's very hard to start a new company here and build something up. So, in terms of
yeah,
trust, in terms of
for
regulations and
sure.
things like that. So, what have you learned about how people start companies in Japan, or the people that you know? Because you said you've spoken to a lot of CEOs and CTOs and stuff,
hmm
people who have been in new companies and startups in Japan. What have you
Yeah,
learned about that?
like in terms of venture funded startups, I mean, you do have a lot of people. Yeah, you have a lot of gaijin starting companies and then getting some seed round or Series A, and there's like companies like Money Tree, for example. So you might know those guys, and so you definitely have these cases where you will see foreigners with some experience in Japan already, typically. So I think this is very key that you're going to speak some Japanese. You've had a job in Japan. You have a network. Maybe you worked in recruitment. Maybe you worked in a tech company already. And then you have that sort of you have all those skills, and you probably have some money saved up too to be able to do that. But a lot of those people are trying to get funding. Like, unless you're a one man show and you're just like doing consulting, which is another thing you can do. Uh, Most of the time I see people going out and trying to raise money. You have some exceptions, like my friend, it's like Audrey Lamsam. She started a company called Aitai Japan, which is basically exporting like different trinkets and toys from like anime, right? And they are available in Japan before they're available in the US. So people are like, oh my gosh, I want that now, right? So she was able to build up a little following on, I don't know, maybe Tumblr or somewhere, and then just like it sort of blew up, and then she made a business out of it. She's never intentionally wanted to be an entrepreneur; it just like sort of happened, right? And like those are really cool stories, and she never needed to raise money. So you have those situations, but even with that situation, it's interesting. I have other friends who are YouTubers and who do different creative sort of jobs as freelancers or as their own individual business. They're doing something for the overseas market, right? Like they're just based in Japan. They're able to get a visa somehow through like freelancing gigs or whatever. And then they're doing something like for a bigger market that has nothing to do with Japan. So you have all these different situations, like people raising money, people, maybe doing it bootstrapped, but like less common. And then you have people that are creatives or maybe doing a business, but it's focused on something overseas. And then you have this category of people, perhaps a little bit different than myself. Like I'm doing a business, nothing to do with Japan, but I'm here because I want to be, and my wife is Japanese, and I can get a visa. So there's I could do the business anywhere and have the business in the US because it's all online. You have like all these different sort of different sort of scenarios and ways to be an entrepreneur, I guess. But it's not easy, right? Like because you have this visa thing, right? You have this question of visa, and I met a guy who wanted to do a startup recently, like 3 months ago, but visa's expiring next month. What are you gonna get? What are you gonna do? Like, you got to get a job, right? So he got a job at a tech company, which is great, and then probably build up something on the side, which is probably the smart thing to do, anyways. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I think that's a good place to end this podcast because we could go on talking about this forever, and I'm sure we will do afterwards. But
yeah, for sure.
for now, where can people find about you or about the blog that you're writing and about Carrus if they want to know more?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, for Carrus, you can just go to the site carrus.io, carrus.io. You can get some free coaching sessions with any of our coaches. And then I have not really been writing the blog recently, but I've restarted writing my newsletter on Substack. So I can link back to that maybe if you have like show notes or something, and
Yeah,
add
we'll
that
put
in
a
there.
link to that in the show notes.
Awesome.
Awesome. Misha, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge with us.
Thanks, man. It was good talking to you.
If you enjoyed that episode and you like what we're doing with Inside Japan, please consider going to iTunes and giving us a 5-star rating and sharing this episode with a friend who you think it might be useful for. As always, a huge thank you to JobsinJapan.com for sponsoring this podcast. And if you're looking for our other episodes, you can find them there, and keep us in mind next time you're looking for work in Japan. Thanks so much for listening, and see you again soon.